my version is that when I left home in the north of England in Yorkshire to go to university in the south of England, I was already in a very serious relationship with a young man who I was very fond of, and I turned up at university on the first day and decided that actually it was going to be pretty hard continuing, even though I was determined. Before I left, I'd sworn blind that I definitely was going to continue with that relationship. So the first term of university was lots of fun, and I met lots of people, and I continued to see my long-term boyfriend in Yorkshire from time to time. And just before the end of the first term,
where in England were you from? We have a question for you. Where in England were you from?
I am from Leeds in Yorkshire.
Leeds in Yorkshire, okay. Leeds in Yorkshire, where they make good puddings.
Maybe.
Okay, maybe.
Just before the first holidays, I was in a bar in Cambridge, and I had always had a penchant for swarthy, mafia-esque looking dark men with curly hair. And across the bar I saw Sean, who at that time had black ringlets down the side of his face and lots of very black curly hair, which has long since disappeared into grey fuzz, unfortunately.
Well, how long was your hair, Sean? Like just down here? The ringlets?
Sort of terrorist length.
Terrorist length, great. Good one. Yes. Okay.
And I thought.
So you're in a bar.
I was in a bar.
Holidays are coming up, or they're just.
So I was supposedly going home to the love of my life, and literally about a week before I was supposed to do that, I saw Sean and decided that I was going to. He was going to be my next boyfriend. I made an instant decision there and then.
At the bar. And how many drinks have you had?
Well, in those days, my drinking partner, prior to meeting you, Jane, who now seems to be my new drinking partner, my drinking partner of that time was a lady called Debbie Marshall, and she was at the same college as Sean, and that's why I was in her college bar, which was Churchill College, Cambridge bar, and we'd had quite a few drinks, it must be said.
Okay.
So I introduced myself to Sean, and he duly ignored me. So
okay.
So we sort of didn't really talk, and I just stood there gazing adoringly in his direction, and then he left, and that was our first meeting.
Okay. Well, what's your version of the first meeting?
Somewhat different.
Somewhat different. Okay. All right. We've got some people joining. Hello.
Well, can I start by saying some of what I may say may be true, including the last sentence. But anyway, red one. Siobhan seems to think we met in a bar. It's not true. We met in a starless night at a May ball at Oxford University, Exeter College, 2 years previously.
Okay. And you don't remember this?
No, I don't. I wouldn't actually meet. We were both definitely at the same ball at the same time.
Okay.
And we both remember the same bands playing and certain. We only discovered this afterwards when we got to know each other. We both remember the same thing. So we must have been in close proximity because of the very similar experiences we had of the ball and the music that was playing and what was happening on that particular night. But we didn't actually meet.
So the stars were aligning, but they weren't there yet.
Zeus had put the stars in motion.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
When the Higsons came out with the line, "We know who shot JFK, it was the CIA, who stole my bongos," that was it.
That was the beginning of our love story.
It was. Followed up shortly by the monochrome set.
These are the bands that were playing.
Those are the bands that were playing. Okay, all right.
So you had the Higsons, who were fantastic.
The Higsons, okay.
And then named after Charlie Higson. And then you had the monochrome set, much underrated band with a discography. Go to Amazon, Very good. Buy the back catalogue. I recommend it heartily. But anyway, there she was.
But there was one lone sort of jazz singer.
That was you.
Woman that was singing.
That was you. She was blonde.
Was singing
was
a version of "Walk On By."
Yes, she was.
That we both remembered, and she was standing sort of on her own off to the side. And for us both to have remembered her particular version of that song, we must have been quite close together.
So you had actually.
But I was with this chap that I'd been having a relationship with for 2 years previously on that night. The reason I was at that ball was because that was his college in Oxford. He was at Oxford University at that point. I was younger than him, so I was still at school, and I was just visiting for the weekend. And
so you must have seen Sean at that event, and then just didn't quite. You never met. And then 2 years he ignores you in a bar.
That's absolutely.
So were you ignoring her, Sean, or were you just?
I was playing hard to get.
You were playing hard to get. Right, perfect.
And can I just say it worked very well.
It worked well, yeah, because here we are now.
Exactly.
Because I'm so determined that later on that same night I found a photograph of Sean with his other college mates somewhere in the university, and from that worked out what room he was in and decided to visit him in the middle of the night.
Whereas I had gone to the trouble of finding out where, in that 2 years, I had tracked you down, because this was pre-computerization.
I know, this is pre-Facebook.
NSA.
You didn't know. You couldn't just look him up on Facebook.
Fortunately, there was a thing called the telephone directory.
Right.
And I worked through every single page of the entire UK, and I tracked it down by trying, it's Sherlock Holmes. I had strings, boards. I tracked her down, and I thought, right, she's going to Cambridge. I better go there too. So I sat the exam, and I thought, who did she have that drunken night with on entrance, which involved basically falling off bar stools, as far as I can understand. I must go to that college because that'll be my intro.
There you go.
So I plotted the whole thing. I knew where she was going to be at what time. I was in that bar. I had my hair in extra tight black curly ringlets at ultimate terrorist length to be attractive to her psyche. I was there.
She's after the bad boys.
I had the leather jacket. I had the whole thing. And back in those days, you used to buy boots from Shelley's on Oxford Street, and to make it really cool, you used to tie bandages around your ankles to make it really stand out. So I went to that length, and I was there in the bar. And I ignored her.
And then you ignored her. Yeah.
Catnip.
But
Catnip.
That actually worked, didn't it? It was like catnip. It was. And then you went and you went back to your room and you said, I am not about to be ignored.
That's right.
I am not about to be ignored. And you went back and you actually found him that night.
Yes.
And do you want to tell us what you were wearing?
I don't think that was the same night. I know exactly what you're thinking of. This was.
Does that involve the parka?
Yeah.
Some
of it's true.
Yes.
Who knows?
No, that is actually true. No, this was later in the relationship.
Lol. Somebody says lol. Yeah. What were you wearing, Siobhan?
This was later in the relationship. This was all of about a month later. When the snow had come to Cambridge. So we went. So that first night that I spent with Sean, he very kindly allowed me into his room.
When you went there in the middle of the night.
I went there in the middle of the night.
This is the night I ignored you.
I can't.
Yes.
I did.
I missed that comment.
Mom, you can watch it back later.
And then, but we had that one night, and then that was the end. We all had to leave Cambridge because they kicked me out at the end of term.
Right?
So I went back to Yorkshire, and at that time, Sean's mother had recently started a new relationship because Sean's parents were recently separated, and Sean was therefore staying in London with his new stepfather to be, as it were, and he was called John, and John was not particularly keen on having a new young man in the house. So whenever I tried to ring, because I'd been given a telephone number, he would put the phone down on me or tell me to go away. So I didn't get in touch with Sean through the whole of that Christmas holiday, which drove me even more crazy.
That was your plan.
Just wait a minute. So you would call Sean, and your now stepfather would hang up on Siobhan?
Yeah, I told him to do it.
Really?
You've got to be hard to get.
Jeez. He'd hang up on you or tell him he's not there or just
he'd say, this is
down.
a business line and I'm busy. So,
Wow.
no, I won't be able to bring him to telephone.
But you were not intimidated by that at all.
No, not to be put off. So anyway, so I put up with that through the holidays and we went back to college. And soon after that, when Sean and I had become friends.
Now, after the holidays, you broke up with your boyfriend.
Holidays. No, I didn't break up with him.
No, you didn't break up with him, but okay.
The boyfriend was hanging in there,
Okay.
determined that it would not be a long-term thing
Okay.
and that I'd get over it. And that was another unfortunate situation. But the immediate situation was that we had a snowy night, and myself and my friend Debbie had been out drinking again, and we'd gone back to her room this time to have a few more drinks, at which point she managed to pass out in the shower. So I decided to put on my parka, which was a nice warm winter coat, whilst wearing...
Military issue, German, British forces on the right, military issue, parka.
I'd bought second-hand in Cambridge Market, but I wasn't wearing anything else because I was also about to get into the shower when she passed out.
Were you wearing Yardley?
So I decided to run across
Hi, thanks for joining.
all the very, very snowy quadrangles in the Cambridge College where we were living, from where my friend Debbie was living to where Sean was living, and make him come all the way back to her room to get her out of the shower naked before she drowned, because I was so drunk I thought she might drown in the shower, which clearly wasn't going to happen on reflection, but at the time it seemed a possibility. So that was me running around Cambridge with no clothes on except a parka in the snow. That was our second little event. It was probably the second night we spent together.
Yes, the secret is out. Yes, the secret is out now. And her children are old enough to hear the secret. They're going to be watching Mike. So this is a second date. This is kind of your second date.
Yeah, somewhere in that. I mean, it was a very loose arrangement for a very long time. You have to bear in mind we met in, like I say, 1983, and we didn't get married until 1991. So that, we had a good 7 or 8 years of on and off before we finally decided it was a serious thing. So this was the first.
Sean, did you ever show up in her room with just a parka?
No, it's too far away.
It's too far away.
Too much like hard work.
No. Play hard to get.
Play hard to get. So yeah, so on and off for like years.
Well, the next notable incident was when my boyfriend from Oxford decided to come and visit Cambridge. Because he'd been in touch with my friend Debbie, who'd been trying to gloss over the whole thing and put him off and allay his fears, and he wasn't having any more of it, and he decided he was going to come and sort out my new boyfriend so that he could reclaim me. And unfortunately, on the night that he arrived, we were all out in a pub in Cambridge getting drunk again, and I was sitting next to an extremely tall, very broad, good-looking Australian postgraduate visiting student who I had become friends with. Sean was also there in the same group, but I was actually sitting with this Australian man, and he was he called Tuckfield? What was it? Chris Tuckfield. Chris Tuckfield. He was a rather feisty chap, probably
Right.
being Australian.
He was
So
a little
when
feisty.
John burst into the bar, he took one look at Chris, decided Chris must be the enemy,
Right.
and made an absolute beeline for him. Chris didn't even bother to ask the question as to what was going on, and they just launched into an all-out fight. Both for me, the two of them. Well, Sean, who was sitting on the other side of the table watching this, knew perfectly well that this was John, and that actually
He's the one who should be fighting
the
them.
one that he should have been after. I just went off to the bar to get another drink, to do anything to intervene at all, and I'm standing there going, no, please stop.
And so who won the fight?
I think Chris did, actually.
I think I did.
You won the fight. No kidding. No kidding. You went up to the bar. Wow. So this is okay. Well, what were you
So that
thinking?
was the end of
What were you
the
thinking,
first.
John, when this was going on? Like, were you thinking, wow, thank dodged the bullet? I didn't get beat
I
up.
thought it was very funny.
You thought it was very funny.
And why get in the way of an Australian finding an Englishman?
Right.
It's good value. So we let them get on, and
that was the end of the first serious boyfriend. So at that point, it became imperative in my mind that I actually make Sean my real boyfriend,
as
opposed to my bit on the side that had been.
Because now your good friend, your friend Chris, has been beaten up because of him. So okay.
Bit on the side. I've got to get another drink.
No. Maddie will get you.
There is a common theme here.
Right, apparently. No, come back, Sean. Come back. We'll serve you. We'll serve you.
We have waiting staff.
He's always waiting.
We have waiting staff here. Get back in the picture here.
So,
yeah.
Come on, Annie. You come and join in too.
Annie's sound asleep. Our dog is sleeping beside Sean.
So what happened then? The next thing that happened after that was, because the first boyfriend had gone. We decided that at the end of the first year, because we'd all been living in our separate colleges, and you make in Cambridge.
Siobhan?
Yes, please, just a drop, thank you. You make friends with people from different colleges, and if you want to spend more time with them, then you have to move out of college and rent a house or something. So we decided that we would rent a house with several of our friends, and we'd all be together in one big house. And needless to say, best plans made. It all fell apart, and when we came back to college the following October, the only two people that were still prepared to rent this house were Sean and I.
There you go.
The
stars were aligning again.
By default, we moved in together, having never made that decision, never planned. Whilst I fancied the pants off him, I had no intention to spend my life with him, and I was already living with him without anybody ever asking me whether or not I wanted to. So that was interesting when my parents visited at the end of that term, and I had to move all his clothes out and pretend I was living on my own.
Oh, you did? Okay, so you didn't... I thought you'd just tell them that you were just friends, you were just roommates, but you actually...
We'd have one bed in one room.
Oh, okay.
No, but it was a two-storey house. It was a two-storey house, so we had Colin upstairs.
There were two people upstairs that were nothing to do with us that were already in the house, and we were renting the room downstairs.
So there was some ambiguity there.
Okay.
Particularly because Colin used to go out late at night and collect shiny objects that he could find in waste disposal units and skips around Cambridge.
Okay.
So that added an extra dimension of ambiguity to everything that was going on in that house.
All right. Okay. All right. So then what happened? So this is your second year in Cambridge now.
Yeah.
And are you in the same year as Siobhan, or are you?
Yeah, we're both in the same year.
Okay.
But we were in different colleges studying different subjects. So we lived together that year, so that was fine. We were fairly sort of in tune. We spent most of the year... Well, actually, we didn't see much of each other because Sean was studying sciences, so he would get up really early in the morning and go to lectures. I was doing humanities, so I would stay in bed all day, do nothing. And then I'd have the odd lecture at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, which I would sometimes go to and sometimes not. And then we'd usually have dinner either in or out together, and we would go to a late night movie. So we typically go out to the movies at 10 o'clock at night, because they were always showing movies late at night in Cambridge. And roll back into bed at 1 o'clock, and that was how we went on for about a year, basically, which was great. Mm-hmm. We had a very nice year. But that was year 2, and because I was doing a languages degree, I then had to take a year out. Well, I didn't have to, but I'd chosen to do my course, and I did a year in France at that point. So I'd left Cambridge, went to France for a year. Sean by then was so completely besotted with me, he very unusually took a year of absence from his course, and got special dispensation because they liked him so much in his faculty to have a sabbatical year.
Okay.
And I was, very touched, and I thought I'd obviously won his heart and he was going to be the love of my life, until he told me that whilst I was spending a year in France, he was going to spend a year in China.
In China. So you thought he was going over there because he was worried about the Frenchmen who might be interested in you.
And he was the other side of the world.
He's heading to China.
So,
Okay. So what was going through your head then, Sean? What were you thinking?
I was thinking Johnny Frog versus terrorist haircut. No contest. I'll go off Southeast Asia, so that's what I did.
You're counting on your hair. On your hair, just holding your... Okay.
So I spent a lot of time in Manila.
Mm-hmm.
which was great fun back then, very entertaining. Then obviously I ran out of money, because that's what you do, and then ended up in Hong Kong, waiting for a ticket home. So it's a long story. I was doing some diving in the Philippines for an expedition that became involved with the Bureau of Fisheries there. Long story. I can't even remember it, it's that long ago. So I ended up in Hong Kong with no money, managed to get in contact with my father, and I said, I could do with a fare home, and he said, great, well, not great, but okay, that'll take a week or two, and it was cheaper in those days to stay in China than it was in Hong Kong. So I went across the border into China and got involved with the making of a movie that was happening, Shogun, with Brian Brown, the great Australian actor, based on the Robert Covell novel. They were shooting it in Hangzhou.
And were you like an extra in Shogun?
Well, I got talking to the, of course, she was Canadian Chinese, because there were a lot of those from Vancouver, and she asked me to work with her as a casting agent, because basically they were looking for extras, and they were going around all the hostels were full of Westerners, and she was looking to assist with her because they needed a cast of thousands, which was probably about 200 Westerners, Guayos, because of course everyone else was Chinese. So anyway, I got involved with that, and then I got the news that I had an air ticket home, and not just the money, it was the ticket, so I had to leave then and there.
Okay.
So that was my brief foray into the film business.
Well, there you go.
Working as assistant to a casting agent
for
in China.
Shogun. Well, Shogun was a pretty darn big movie, so that's very impressive. But then you went back to Britain. Okay, so now that was for a year. You were gone for a year, or what happened?
On and off.
And there's no texting, there's no email, there's nothing. So did you write you love letters? No, there were no love letters.
I wrote her long letters, but she said she couldn't read my writing, so she never read them.
Okay, so you did attempt to write love letters, but you couldn't read them.
Well,
the handwriting
that's
was so
what
bad.
he says.
They were deeply philosophical musings about the interplay of yin and yang, and love and marriage, and horse and carriage, and Surrey with a fringe on top.
Right.
But she didn't read them.
Typically,
did you keep them?
Years later, he said to me, "Where are those letters that I wrote you when I was away?" And I said, "I don't know. I chucked them out. I couldn't read them."
I couldn't read them.
And you know what he said at that point? He said, "Well, I only wrote them as a record of what I was doing, and now I want them."
I wrote them as a record.
I wanted her to
nothing
feel
romantic.
Really
it was just, this is what I was doing.
I was just trying to make her feel bad. And
Okay.
it worked quite well.
There you go.
So that was the end of the third year. So we had to go back to university for a year to do get our degree, do our final exams. So we agreed that we would share our house together again. And we found a place. Now we were out of step because most people only do 3-year degrees, and so most of our people that we'd known that we were friends with had left.
I did come to Paris.
Yeah, you visited once. Yes.
You visited
Twice.
Did you come twice? I don't remember.
You can't remember.
He did. It is true. Through the year he visited.
Okay.
Definitely for a few days. Anyway, so we have to go back for our final year. We're going to share a house. It was going to be Sean, myself, and Debbie, because she was another linguist. So she'd done her year in France, in the south of France. So she'd also been off. So there was going to be the three of us. So needless to say, I turn up on the first day to find that Sean has decided that because it's the final year and he has to work hard and get a good degree, he's going to move back into college and not live with me at all. So I shared a house with my friend Debbie, which was fine. But, thanks for that.
So you were ditched for a second year.
So I'd been ditched yet again. Mm-hmm. So that was our final year at university. And really after that it was just all a bit sort of ramshackle, wasn't it? Because
and there goes the next 25 years.
At the end
ramshackle.
of the final year when we both got our degrees, neither of us, most people have got jobs and plans and sensible things to do, neither of us had sorted anything out. So again, by default, we just both went to live in his mother's house in London.
So you went and lived with his mother in her house.
Yeah,
and
but
now she's remarried.
Yeah, to
She's
John.
married to the guy who kept hanging up on you.
She was just living with him.
Oh,
as
she was
well.
just living with him. Okay.
And he wasn't best pleased about that and did quite a lot of shouting about it. So I lasted about a month before I moved out and went to live with my sister. At which point, Sean also followed me and came to live with my sister, and she didn't like that much either. So we were unpopularly sofa surfing at this point from various house to house until we finally found somebody who would let us live in the house that he was an architect and he had various properties that he was in the process of renovating, building, and he needed people to live in them, look after them. So we then went and lived in those. So we basically squatted our way around London for about, I don't know, 6 months to a year before we decided we'd go back to the place that Sean had been in the Philippines because it was cheaper there.
So you went back and lived in the Philippines together.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we did all this whilst never at any time, saying that we wanted to spend any time with each other. We just couldn't come up with anything better to do.
There's nothing better. So let's just go to the Philippines together. Okay, so when did you finally? Okay, here's my question I ask everybody: when did you know that this is probably the person I'm going to spend the rest of my life with?
Well, I maintain it was that.
What?
Yeah, right.
Why is that happening?
Is that happening? I'm sorry, Sean. I hate to tell you, it's been how many years?
What?
38 or something? No, 30.
I maintain the first time.
Well, I'm going to live forever. This is a mere blink of the
Oh,
eye.
I see. This is nothing. Okay.
I-
When did you know you were going to marry this woman?
I believe in love at first sight, and I was absolutely smitten that first time I saw him in the bar. I was completely taken by him.
You see?
if
Okay,
I'm
so you know.
very
you knew
sadly
immediately.
honest.
Okay.
And all the just hanging around, waiting, doing everything by default was because Sean was never ever willing to commit to anything. Didn't believe in marriage, didn't believe in children, didn't ever want to do this, didn't ever want to do that. And I just hung on in there for years.
Oh no, you just think you don't believe in that stuff, Sean. Okay, so no, seriously, when did you know? When did you know?
When did you give in?
I haven't.
When did
It's
you know?
all a front. No, I don't know. I'm still playing hard to get.
It's still playing hard to get. Okay, well, how did you propose to Siobhan?
Oh God. I bet you can't even remember.
Did I propose?
Yeah, well, after a fashion. We had got to the point, move on a few years, and we both had jobs and we were both living in London. Having lived, because we lived in Manila and we lived in Australia, and then we were back in London, and then we were back to the Philippines. So there were 3 or 4 years where we were all over the place, just earning a bit of money here, earning a bit of money there. Sean contracted hepatitis really severely and was very, very sick, and I nursed him in London for several months.
You gave it to me.
You gave it to him? You gave him hepatitis?
Well, he thinks
You gave me
so.
hepatitis and 2 children.
So at that point we were so broke we both had to get serious jobs, and therein began the rot. Once we were on the path to, Sean became an accountant and I started working in publishing and then subsequently became a lawyer. And once we had serious jobs and we got a proper home, we were renting for some time, but we rented fairly upmarket places in central London, and we were living a more standard lifestyle. And at that point I started being quite obsessed with getting married, because various people started saying to me, oh, I've heard all these stories about, men that live with women for 7 years and then one day, they never marry them, and then one day they walk out and they marry somebody else 6 months later, So
right,
like,
so you thought there was
lived
a chance that
you've
you
lived
invested
that
this
long.
many years, you are going to make it happen.
Yeah, because everybody was saying
She's still waiting for me to do this.
if they live with you that long, then they're never going to marry you, and they just
Right.
want to definitely go, So I was becoming quite neurotic about the whole thing, and so I was. Every New Year's Eve, I would be convinced that he would. And it didn't.
It's going to happen.
I don't know. Every year I would just hope that this year would be the year. So it was always a New Year thing for me.
Oh, okay.
And then, so that never happened. Of course, inevitably.
Hi,
because Sean's
Broadfield.
Sean.
We'll just say
And,
some of the people who are watching.
And then in 1991, in February, we were Saturday morning lying in our bed, and just like we had done for forever, being very boring. And he literally went, oh, let's get married.
Oh.
That was it.
So there was
Now,
no
here,
ring.
here
Okay.
I come back to the.
Okay.
Some of this is true. Some of this may not be true.
Well, what do you think happened? How do you think we got married?
I don't.
You don't even remember saying it.
I can't remember.
Yeah, exactly. No, he did. He literally just went, oh.
Let's get married.
You might
Okay,
have said,
okay.
shall we get married? I don't know. But it was definitely a sort of, oh, yeah, well. And because he was like not into the whole thing, we thought, right, we'll just go to the registry office at the end of which was in Judd Street near King's Cross
Right.
in London, near the flat that we were renting. And we went down there to fill in the forms, and we came out. And I was nearly in tears because it was so awful. It was like a British Rail waiting room with orange plastic bucket
The orange
seats
plastic
and-
chairs did it for me.
Oh,
It reminded me of my secondary school, and I thought,
So
it's an
amazing.
assembly. I don't want to do that.
Amazingly, because I was so desperate to get married, I would have got married anywhere at that point. And yeah, this is how sad I am as such a sad creature. And Sean actually went, oh, we can't get married now. And because I was so used to being rejected by then, I assumed he was saying, we're not getting married. And he went, we'll have to go and find a church. I nearly cried for joy because I wanted to get married in church because I knew that my parents would be
sorry, I
happy.
missed your comment. Sorry, missed it.
That was a very big comment.
It was a big.
Yeah, they're probably saying
It was probably very rude about me.
It was probably very rude about me and what a doormat I am.
Okay, so then what church did you get married in?
We actually had a beautiful wedding. We got married in St Bride's on Fleet Street, which is a Christopher Wren church. It's absolutely gorgeous.
It's the precursor to all the wedding cakes, because if you look at the spire, it looks just like a wedding cake, and that's where wedding cakes come from.
Well, there you go.
The
I
journalist
did not know
church.
that.
And
I did
not
know
many
that.
people are allowed to get married there. We were only allowed to get married there because I was working in publishing, and it has a connection with journalism and publishing matters generally, and you have to live in the district, and we were living quite close. And Sean was working at Coops and Lybrand, as it was in those days, which was just next door, and there was another connection. And so we had to have special dispensation from the Archbishop of Canterbury to allow us to get married there.
Wow,
So we got-
very special. So you went from the orange plastic chairs to this very special
Very
church.
beautiful church.
Well, that's good. That was a big upgrade.
And even more excitingly, because there was the connection with journalism, and this was in the beginning of the 1990s, John McCarthy, I don't know if you remember him, but he was kidnapped
In Lebanon.
in Lebanon, and he was imprisoned for several years with Terry Waite, and there was an ongoing campaign to free John McCarthy and Terry
Right.
Waite from their captivity. And this church was heavily involved with the campaign, and they had a life-size cut-out cardboard figure of this man who was a journalist.
You
John
almost
McCarthy.
married him.
And we got married next to him because it was there at the
that's too
front
funny.
of the church. Well, we got married. Us and John McCarthy.
The only way you could tell us apart was I had the curlier hair.
And-
You had the curlier
And
hair.
Canas,
There
and
you
our
go.
wedding photographs.
He couldn't say I
lots
do.
of curly hair. No, he
I
not
did.
say
Because
it.
he was a cardboard cutout.
But-
Well, okay, so you got married. Finally.
That's it. That's the end of the story.
No, I mean, wow. I mean, that's quite a story. I didn't know that you had lived in all the Asian countries like Manila and China, like all those
Yeah,
places.
we've
The
been
Philippines.
everywhere.
And before you went back and got married in England. Well, that's pretty cool. And now you live in Australia, and you've become Australian citizens. Even
Australians, we're Australians. Australians.
Australians, yeah.
Yes, we are. We are dual citizens.
Dual citizenship.
Yep.
Okay, so all those years together, and so you never did tell us when you really knew that Siobhan was the one.
Well, obviously back at the Maypole at Exeter College.
Okay, so right
'Cause
away,
I pursued
right.
it.
Okay,
She
so even
channeled-
2
she-
years before Siobhan, you knew.
I knew before she did, and she's done all the talking and all this blah 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 blah. I knew.
You knew right from the very beginning, but you just weren't going to tell her.
Hard to get.
String her along.
Hard to get.
Okay. Well, thank you. Oh, thank you. Can't wait for the children to see this. Yeah. I know. Well, it's going to be on Facebook, Real Love Tales Facebook page, so they're waiting to see it. Yeah. They're going to be. It's a good story. Thank you for sharing with me. I I had to
Talk
twist
to
their
us.
arms and give them wine to get them to tell me, but I'm really glad they did. It was a great story.